What if the most dangerous person you ever met smiled at you first? Not a villain, not someone who set off alarms, not someone with cold eyes or a nervous energy you couldn't quite place. Just a guy, confident, polished,
A pleasure
the
to
kind
meet
of
you,
person
sir.
you'd want to
The pleasure
introduce
is
to
all
your
mine,
parents.
young man.
And that's
How lovely
exactly
to
what
see
made
you.
him catastrophic. Stay with me, because by the end of this, the way you read people will never be quite the same. This is the story of Ted Bundy. But more than that, it's the story of a weapon most people never see coming, and why the human brain is almost perfectly designed to miss it. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. If you handed someone his biography and covered the ending, they'd describe a success story. Raised in the Pacific Northwest, sharp student, law school at the University of Utah, worked on a gubernatorial campaign in Washington state, volunteered at a suicide prevention hotline,
I
where
understand
he
how
was,
painful
by
this is for
every
you.
account,
Please,
incredibly
stay on the line
effective
with
at
me.
calming people
We can
down.
get through this
Let
together.
that land for a second. The man would go on to become one of the most feared names in American criminal history, and he spent part of his 20s talking
hear how
people out of
overwhelmed you're
taking their
feeling
own
right
lives.
now. It's
That
okay to feel
contradiction
this way.
doesn't
You're
make
not alone.
sense. And that's exactly the point. Because Bundy understood, either instinctively or through careful study, a truth that most of us spend our whole lives ignoring. People decide if you're safe within the first few seconds of meeting you. And once they've decided, almost nothing changes their mind. Psychologists call it the halo effect. If someone is attractive,
Colleagues, the data is
well-spoken, and
automatically
composed,
We must
the
confront
brain
this challenge
automatically
directly, or the
fills in the
repercussions
gaps.
will be severe
It
and
assumes
far-reaching.
warmth. It assumes good intentions. It assumes safety. Bundy was athletic and conventionally handsome. He made eye contact without making it feel intrusive. He remembered names. He leaned in when you spoke, like what you were saying was the most interesting thing he'd heard all week. He was a study in how to make someone feel seen. And people, smart people, cautious people, people who trusted their gut, walked right past every instinct they had. Here's where it gets more unsettling. Bundy didn't just rely on charm. He studied it. He watched how people responded to different versions of himself and refined the performance over time. He understood that vulnerability was disarming, that someone asking for help seemed categorically incapable of being dangerous. There are accounts of him using a fake arm cast in public spaces, fumbling with groceries, struggling with boxes, to manufacture a moment where someone felt needed. Needed, helpful kind. The person who stopped to assist wasn't naive. They were responding to every social cue we've been trained since childhood to recognize as safe. The cast, the helpless posture, the grateful smile. It's the oldest trick in the book of human nature. We are wired for cooperation. We feel good when we help. And that warmth, that completely human, completely generous impulse, was the gap he exploited. Now pause. Because I don't want you to walk away from this story feeling like the lesson is don't trust anyone. That's not it. That's actually the wrong takeaway, and I'll come back to why. But first, you need to understand just how long this went on. By the mid-1970s, there were disappearances spreading across multiple states. Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Utah, Florida. Law enforcement at the time was operating in a world before modern forensics, before digital databases, before the kind of interagency communication we take for granted now. Each jurisdiction was running its own investigation. The patterns existed, but they were like puzzle pieces scattered across a massive table, with different people holding different corners. Bundy knew this. He moved. He changed cars. He changed his appearance. He stayed ahead of a system that wasn't yet built to catch someone like him. And when he was finally caught, twice, he didn't collapse. He didn't confess. He didn't break. He strategized. He escaped custody. Twice. The first time through a second-floor courthouse window. The second time through a ceiling panel in a jail cell. And when he eventually stood trial in Florida in 1979, one of the first major trials in American history to be broadcast on television, he did something that shocked almost everyone in that courtroom. He represented himself, stood before a judge, in front of cameras watched by millions of people, and argued his own case. With full knowledge of what he had done. The courtroom footage is difficult to watch, not because of anger or chaos, but because of how calm he was. How rehearsed. How convinced, even then, that he could find a way through. He couldn't. He was convicted, and he was executed in the electric chair on January 24th, 1989. But here's the
I know
part
this
that
is
no
hard,
one
but I'm
talks about
holding up.
enough. In the
Your visits
final
mean
years of his
everything.
life,
Stay
Bundy
strong.
gave a series of interviews. Detailed ones. He spoke to FBI investigators, to journalists, to psychologists. And some of what he said was, in a strange and uncomfortable way, illuminating. He talked about the performance of normalcy as something practiced, as something built, He described the cultivation of trustworthiness the way someone else might describe learning a language or a skill, which raises a question that I think is actually more important than the crime itself. If danger can be constructed to look exactly like safety, what do we actually trust? This isn't a rhetorical question. It's a real one, and researchers have been working on it for decades. The honest answer is, most of us overtrust presentation and undertrust pattern. We respond to how someone looks in a moment, rather than how their behavior tracks over time. We respond to confidence as competence. We respond to smoothness as sincerity. These aren't character flaws. They're cognitive shortcuts that evolved in environments where they mostly worked. Small communities, repeated interactions, slower movement. Bundy exploited the gap between the world those shortcuts evolved for and the world we actually live in. But here's the thing I want you to hold on to. And this is the part that most retellings of this story miss. The lesson is not paranoia. The lesson is literacy. Because the same research that explains how someone like Bundy operated also gives us a framework for sharpening the tools we already have. Behavioral consistency over time matters more than first impressions. Does someone's behavior match across situations? Or are they one person with you and a different one when stakes change? Does someone respect your hesitation? Or do they subtly pressure you past it? Do they respect the word no? Or do they reframe it, negotiate it, treat it as an opening bid? These aren't revolutionary ideas. They're just things we rarely say out loud. And there's a reason stories like this one get watched by tens of millions of people every year. It's not morbid curiosity, though that's part of it. It's the instinct to understand, to map the contours of a thing so we can see it coming. That impulse is healthy. Feed it. Ted Bundy became one of the most studied figures in criminology not just because of the scope of what he did, but because of how he operated. In plain sight, with the full cooperation of a world that had been given no reason to look twice. He was a mirror held up to the assumptions we don't know we're making. The ones that say, this person looks fine, they must be fine.
Are you sure?
This person is charming,
Of course.
they can be
Trust
trusted.
me.
This person asked for help, so they need it. And in the decades since, those assumptions have been studied, challenged, and slowly refined. The FBI's behavioral science unit was built partly in response to cases
Where
like
were
his.
you on the night of the
Interview
15th?
techniques changed.
I told you
Investigative
I was at home.
frameworks changed.
Alone?
The world got a little harder to fool. Not impossible, but harder. And maybe that's the most honest ending to this story. Not a clean resolution. Not a satisfying moral. Just the uncomfortable awareness that understanding human nature, really understanding it, including its vulnerabilities, is a lifelong project. One worth taking seriously. If you made it here, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is for. Subscribe, leave a like, and drop in the comments. Who should I cover next? Because some stories don't just stay with you. They change how you see.